and welcome back for another Not Too Shabby Shop Design Team project. Today I have two cards with a very similar design. It's that time of year for Valentine and Galentine cards, and I thought that this Be Mermazing and Hugs and Fishes stamp set would be perfect for these cards. I'm starting with my first card. The designs, as I did mention, are going to be very similar with different looks. I'm going to start building a background on this 3x6 piece of white cardstock, and I'm using stamps from both the Be Mermazing and the Hugs and Fishes stamp set. I have some seashells, some sand dollars, a few fish, and some starfish, and I'm just placing them in the background as close as I can get them together to fill up this space. Once I get everything placed down, then I'll close the Misti door, I'll pick up the stamps, and I'll add my Versamark ink, which is a clear embossing ink. It's going to allow the embossing powder to stick to it, and I am going to be using my white Hero Art embossing powder today on this particular project. I decided to go with these ocean themed stamp sets. I thought that they were absolutely adorable when they were released last year. They're still available over in the Not Too Shabby shop. I will have everything linked in the description box below, but I just felt like, I don't know, I'm just ready to move into the beach season. Summertime and going to the beach are some of my favorite memories, some of my favorite things to do, and I think that these two sets really coordinate well together. They're interchangeable. You can use stamps from either set together, and so I thought that this would be the perfect, for this first one is going to be more of a Galentine card. I did mention that I'm going to be doing some emboss resist. As you saw, I did melt the embossing powder with my heat tool, and now I'm adding my Distress Oxide ink, which is going to resist that embossing powder. I started with the blue, so I started with Prize Ribbon. I added this color, which is Evergreen Bough. I was going a little bit more muted right now, so I'm blending it carefully with my blending brush, making sure that I get a nice transition between all of the colors. I'm adding some water into the palm of my hand very heavily, as you can see with my Distress sprayer, and I like to clap over the top of my panel so that I get really nice big splatters. That water is going to oxidize the ink. It's going to give that white chalky feel to it, and then I used my Ranger heat tool to heat it and dry it. This is my absolute favorite stamp from both of these stamp sets. It is the adorable Narwhal. You will notice that I colored it with my C markers. My darkest color was a C3. I blended it with a C1 and finished it off with a C0, I believe. The cheeks are automatically freckled, so the stamp does have the freckles, but I didn't want those freckles to be black, so I am using my white gel pen to not only add accents to the narwhal, but to also cover up those black freckles and make them white. I did color the cheeks with a very bright pink. I wanted to add that brightness to the narwhal since I did use the grays. For this circle, I cut this out using a circle from my stash. I ink blended it with Worn Lipstick, which is going to be the red. So I didn't mention this, but this is kind of like a rainbow colored card. As you noticed, I did have the yellow, green, and blue. This is the orange, it is the abandoned coral. I had an MFT circle, a scallop circle that I'm going to back this smaller circle with, and that will, without the color purple, complete my rainbow. I'm going to add some foam tape to the back of this narwhal. I felt like I wanted just a little bit of dimension, so I am going to be using my trusty foam tape on the back of this, and then we'll start assembling our card. My finished card base is going to be 3 1/4 by 6 1/4 inches. I like that size of slimline card or mini slimline card. I really like the mini slimlines. I feel like they're the perfect alternative to an A2 size card. I use the slimline cards a lot for scene building, but for this style of card, I just think that they're really cute. I think that cute is kind of the word that I would use for the mini slimline. So here I'm adding, I finally got that release paper off. I'm adding my narwhal to the circle, and then I'm going to add this entire piece to the center, more towards the top of this panel. I did use my microfiber cloth to wipe off the panel to make sure that I got the ink off of the embossed areas. That kind of cleaned that up, and then I'm centering this onto that mini slimline base, and we are going to trim off a little bit of the top. I just kind of measured the length of this, so I just trimmed a little bit off the top so that I had an even white border all around the edges. For card number 2, we're going for the same design, except we're using an A2 size card base. This time I have a heart instead of a circle. I'm using Kitsch Flamingo Distress Oxide ink, and I am going to add a little bit of stamping over the top. I have this 6x6 piece of 6x6 stamp that is in my stash. It has a beautiful mandola lace look to it. Because it is a red rubber stamp, I did need to remove the foam from my Misti, and I've added some tape to the back of this heart. I wanted to keep that heart in place as I use the picked raspberry to stamp the image onto that heart. Once I get a good impression, I'll go over it one more time. I will remove it, clean off my Misti, and then I have a scrap piece of white cardstock, and I'm going to ink this up again using that picked raspberry, place that paper in my Misti, and then I'll do a little bit of stamping. Once I get the impression that I'm looking for, I'm going to add a little bit of Kitsch Flamingo around the edges over top that picked raspberry. I'm going to trim this down. I'll trim it down to 4 by 5 1/4 inches. I do want to have a little bit of a white border around my card. So my finished card is going to be A2, as I mentioned, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. I will have a top folding card. As I trim this down, I'm trying as best I can to make sure that that center circle is in the center of this card base, because as you can see, the pattern is going to match up when I place my heart over the top. I have these two two seahorses that I have stamped out using some Copic friendly ink, and I'm going to do a little bit of Copic coloring. I decided to keep this card monochromatic, so both of the seahorses are going to be pink. The male horse is going to be a little bit lighter than the female horse. So I'm starting with the RV markers that you can see on the screen. I'm adding some eyeshadow to the eyes of the girl, some lipstick, and then of course I'm adding those cheeks. I'll add some white highlights to the female seahorse. So I'll bring in my white gel pen and I'll add a few dots. I'll add some freckles to her cheeks. For the boy, you can see how much lighter I kept his body, but I am going to keep those bold stripes. So the stamped image does have stripes in it, and I just went over those black lines with a darker Copic marker. Once I finish up with this guy, I'll bring in that gel pen. For both the narwhal and the seahorses, I did cut them out using my brother's Scan and Cut. At this time, there are not coordinating dies for these stamps. I'm just adding the eyelashes back in, getting them a little bit darker on that seahorse. I had went over it with my white gel pen and I didn't like the look that I had, so I just covered it up again using a black micron pen. So now I'm going to glue this panel to my top folding card base. And I'll center that, and as you can see, we're going to have a very similar design once I add this heart. Instead of stamping the sentiment underneath the seahorses, I chose to add a sentiment strip, so that is the only difference in the design. Both of the designs have the sentiment underneath the images, but this time I'm going to add a strip because I just felt like I had enough going on inside that heart. For this card, the seahorses are going to be kissing, so I'll have them right up against each other. You did see that I did add foam tape. I have these love hearts in my stash. The pink on the hearts is kind of like a spun sugar, so it's just a little bit lighter than the worn lipstick, but the love is more on the deeper side of the picked raspberry. I'm going to add 2 on the left and the right sides of the seahorses and 1 in the center, and then that will finish off the heart. And then I'm going to bring my Misti back in, and when I bring my Misti in, I'll bring in a scrap piece of paper. I'm going to use the same Hugs and Fishes sentiment that I used on the first card. This time I'm going to heat emboss it, and I'm going to use that same white embossing powder. Once I heat emboss this and melt that embossing powder, I will use the picked raspberry to color this. I wanted a little bit of contrast, so I went back to the picked raspberry just to give that little pop of color. I'll use my microfiber cloth to clean off the sentiment so that that Hugs and Fishes really stands out. Make sure when you're doing your ink blending, if you need to hold on to anything, that you do use a microfiber cloth or a piece of paper so that you don't get any fingerprints, because that ink will oxidize. Once I glue this down, I'll bring in my scissors and I'm going to trim the left and the right side, and that will finish off my second card today. So I hope you enjoyed this video. The products that I used from the Not Too Shabby shop will be linked in the description box below. Both of these stamp sets, as I mentioned, are available in the store. Here's a look at both of the cards, and until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day. Thanks so much for watching.